Let's begin this lesson with a riddle. What is the difference between a Korean boy band and an eye? Well, one is eye candy, while the other is just an eye. Ha ha ha. And of course, you only study the eye in biology. Too bad. So here we are into our topic on the human eye, which is part of the visual system. Now, you might remember seeing these colored blobs back in primary school during your health checkups. The nurse asks you to sit down, look at this, and to tell her, do you see any numbers or anything? And you've been very proud if you could tell her that over here, yeah, I see a number 18. And over here, I see a number 74. Of course, for some people, this just looks like a bunch of colors to them. And no one ever told you back then, but this really is a test, and it's a test for our eye function. No one told you it was called the Ishihara plates, not just a blob of colors. And yes, they do test for color blindness. It might interest you that colorblind people don't see the world in black and white. They still see it in color, just that they find it very difficult to differentiate between certain shades of colors. And when you were young, you might have also seen some of these interesting pictures or visual illusions, right? I love them. And you look at them and they'll ask you things like, which robot or which person is bigger. And, you think quite obviously this guy is bigger. But no, surprise, when you remove the lines, actually they're exactly the same size. So what's going on here? Now, whether it's color blindness or visual illusions, where our mind seems to play tricks on us, both have something to do with the visual system. Right? The visual system is a group of organs which help us to perceive the world around us. And part of the visual system, of course, are our eyes. That's where we receive the stimuli from the environment. So the eyes receive stimuli from the environment, and some nerve signals are sent through the optic nerve all the way to parts of the brain. For instance, the visual cortex. That's one part of the brain that's very important in our visual perception. Now, for this topic, we're just going to be focusing on the eyes. The eyes are the sense organs that receive the stimuli from the environment. We won't really be looking at the rest of the visual system. However, it's very interesting, and some of you might go on to study it next time and to understand how everything works together to help us to perceive the world around us. So let's get going. So in this video, we'll be talking about what are the parts of the eye and also what are their different functions. And we'll touch a bit also about how do we see. Right, so these are the textbook pages that you can refer to. So let's begin by looking at the eye from the front, as though someone was staring at you. Now, what parts of the eye do you see? Well, one of the first parts you might notice is the white color part of the eye. And the white color part is called the sclera. Now, the sclera is a tough outer covering that protects the eye from mechanical damage. And in fact, the sclera covers the entire eyeball. You can see that from the side view. This is the side view. The sclera is labeled here. You can see that the sclera covers the outside of the entire eyeball. However, you might ask, how come this part of the eye here is not white? Right? The sclera covers the whole thing. How come this part is not white? Well, that's because in the front of the eye, instead of the sclera, we have the cornea. And the cornea is a transparent layer of tissue, and we'll see that it's important later for bending light into the eye. And you can see that the cornea is in front of the eye, and the cornea is continuous with the sclera, meaning that here's the sclera, and then it actually kind of changes into the cornea at the front of the eye. Now, the sclera is also covered by a transparent, thin membrane called the conjunctiva. So here's the conjunctiva in this diagram here. You can see that the conjunctiva covers the sclera, and the conjunctiva is continuous with the skin of the eyelid. So here's the eyelid, and the conjunctiva is here. It is kind of also behind the eyelid. The importance of the conjunctiva is to produce mucus to keep your eye moist. It's also to kind of protect the sclera. Now, you might have seen people with red eyes, swollen eyes before. That they might have a disease called conjunctivitis. And that's when the conjunctiva gets infected and starts to become inflamed. Now, besides the sclera, right, there's also the very obvious colored part of your eye called the iris. The iris is actually made out of muscle, circular sheets of muscles. We'll take a look at it later. And actually helps to control the amount of light that enters the eye. The iris helps to control the size of the pupil. The pupil is the actual hole of the eye. It is the hole in the iris that allows light to enter into your eye. Because the eye is such an important organ, we also have parts that help to protect the eye. You can see that also from the front view. We have the eyelids, which protect the eye through blinking. And when you squint as well, put your eyes in little slits to prevent too much light from entering. Then you have your eyelashes, which shield you from dust particles. And then we have the tear glands, which secrete tears, and it's also responsible for people crying. So at this point, I would like you to read a bit of your textbook on your own. So here are the textbook pages. And you can think about these questions. So more about what is blinking, what's squinting, what's the function of tears besides crying. It also has other functions like lubricating your eye, etc. So have a good read and then come back to the video once you're done. Okay, now that we've seen the eye from the front view, we're going to take a look at the eye from the side view. This is a cross section of the eye. If you chop the eye into half, this is what you will see from the side. So what are the parts of the eye from the side? Well, the first thing to recognize is that there are three main layers. We have the outermost layer, that white tough protective covering, the sclera. And then you have this layer, which in the diagram is dark blue, the choroid layer. And then in the diagram, this light blue layer, the retina. Right? So let's take a closer look at each of these main layers first. So first, the sclera. You can see again this tough white outer covering, continuous with the cornea in front. And the cornea, as I mentioned, is the transparent, is a dome-shaped transparent tissue that helps to bend light into the eye. In fact, it is responsible for most of the refraction or bending of light into the eye. So for example, if light comes into your eye in this angle, the cornea helps to bend it so that it kind of enters your eye at the correct angle. And interestingly, when people go for, you might have heard of LASIK surgery, that involves actually cutting a slit, cutting open the cornea so that the surgeon can gain access to the inside of the eye. Alright, next, below the sclera, we have the choroid layer. Now, the choroid layer is a pigmented layer, and that's important because it prevents the internal reflection of light. So, for example, if light enters the eye, if it were to reflect internally, that means if there was no choroid, the light would bounce off everywhere within the eye like this, causing lots and lots of chaos, right? Because light from one point outside of the eye will end up forming images on multiple parts of the eye, and we don't want that. So to prevent internal reflection of light, the choroid layer is pigmented, very dark, so it absorbs any light which falls on it, and so that the light does not reflect out again. Secondly, the choroid also contains blood vessels, and that's important to provide nutrients, oxygen for the eye, and also to remove any waste products from it. And finally, below the choroid, we have the retina. And the retina contains photoreceptors. These are cells that detect light, that respond to light. There are two types in our eyes. There are rods and cones. We'll take a look at that later on. But importantly, first know that the retina contains all the cells which are sensitive to and respond to light. Alright, they can actually produce electrical impulses in response to light. Right, and finally, we have also the rectus muscle. You might notice these muscles here. And these are muscles that help to control your eye movement. So for example, if this muscle on top contracts, the eye will move upwards. If this muscle contracts, the eye will move downwards. And there are also rectus muscles that connect to the side of your eye so that your eye is able to rotate left and right. Right, finally, we also have I wanted to show you as well that you can look at the iris and the pupil from the side view. So the pupil is here, is an opening where the light can enter. And here's the iris, which forms a circular sheet of muscle around the pupil. Well, now that we've seen some of the main parts of the eye, let's move on to answer the question of how do we see. Well, have you seen one of these devices before? It's called a pinhole camera, and it's a box basically with a small little hole. And so you can see how light rays from the outside will enter this hole and will form an upside down image on the inside, which you can take a look at from the screen here. Now it turns out the pinhole camera is designed kind of based on the eye. So the eye works in a very similar fashion. So let's take a look at it. Alright, so here is a diagram of our eye and an object outside in the environment, a candle in this case. So how do we see? Well, light will come from the object, sometimes reflected from the sun or other external sources of light. In this case, the candle produces light, so light rays will emit from the candle and enter the eye. Now when it enters the eye, the light rays are refracted or bent by the cornea first. So here's the cornea, the transparent dome in front of the eye. And the diagram here, the cornea doesn't look like it's bending the light. However, in reality, the cornea does help to bend the light quite a bit so that it enters the eye at the correct angle. So light rays are refracted by the cornea, and then finally the light rays are focused on the retina at the back to form an image, to form an upside down inverted image on the retina. Now, what other parts help to refract and focus the light rays beside the cornea? In fact, you can see some of the other main structures here, right? The light rays also pass through what is called the aqueous humor, the lens, and the vitreous humor. And we're going to take a look at this in the next few slides. These parts also help to refract and to focus the light rays to form an image on the retina. Okay, so more labeling of your diagram. First, we have the aqueous chamber. It is a chamber between the cornea and the iris. Alright, and here this chamber is filled with a liquid called the aqueous humor. Ha ha ha, very funny. I'm not joking. Right, and secondly, behind the lens, this is the lens, behind the lens we have another chamber called the vitreous chamber, which is filled with another fluid called the vitreous humor, which is also very funny. But the main point, jokes aside, is that both humors help to keep the eyeball firm and also help to refract light further. And finally, we have the lens. Now the lens is very important as well in helping to refract and to focus light on the retina. Now in fact, the lens has a very important function in helping us focus on objects at different distances, near and far objects. We'll look at this more later when we look at focusing. Now, it's interesting because the lens is able to adjust its shape and thickness to help us focus on objects at different distances. Now, the cornea couldn't do that, right? It can't adjust its thickness, it's just there. And the aqueous humor and the vitreous humors are just there. But the lens is able to change its shape and thickness slightly to bend the light in slightly different ways. And what helps the lens to change its shape and thickness are the ciliary muscles over here. They're found in the ciliary body. We'll look at this more later. And also the suspensory ligaments that connect the lens to the ciliary body. We'll see how these three parts work together later to help us focus on objects at different distances. Alright, so let's summarize all that. So how do we see? Well, first, light rays have to enter our eye from external objects. And then those light rays are bent and refracted first by the cornea, then by the aqueous humor, then the lens, and then the vitreous humor. And all that is to focus the light rays on our retina in order to form an image, an inverted image on our retina. Now in the next video, we're going to see a bit more about how the retina detects this image which is formed on it. So I'll see you there. See you.